welcome to the Friday Matinee here on your hometown station, AM 1220, KHTS. I am T.
I'm George.
And we're going to do things a little bit different today because we have a new clock.
Our new clock, as it were, radio, as how we say it in the biz. So we have a new clock. So these are each 20-minute segments now.
We have 20-minute segments, and we're going to fill them with a gentleman who's got an amazing. Did you grow up watching cartoons or just like being that person?
That's what I lived
hang on
for.
to them?
That is what I lived for. Were cartoons.
Well, I always thought I would stop at a certain point watching cartoons, and then I found no, I actually really like them.
Kept going.
And then I worked in cartoons for a little while, and I remembered saying, gosh, there's so much that goes into this, but it's one of the best production machines ever because every single aspect is so wildly creative and it's so visual and it's so, I always liked the audio of it. The whole animal is really fun. So did you like when it was back in the day, do you remember shorts that would come up before films? Did you love those?
I caught I was very, 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 very young when they might have still had those in the late 60s.
Like Woody Woodpecker.
But a lot of that I remember from afternoon cartoons. They didn't have a whole lot of first run animation stuff after school. So they did have your Woody Woodpecker and Heckle and Jekyll and of course the Looney Tunes Warner Brothers stuff that I just lived for.
Oh, I
loved Bugs Bunny.
I did too, and I loved all the cartoons that came up. And then I remember the first time my dad brought home a comic book, I thought I had died and gone to heaven because when I was really little, I didn't know there was such a thing. I was reading the Dick and Jane kind of books and the books for kids, but all of a sudden here I was. I think the first time I read a comic book, it must have been 7 or 8 years old, and it was the most magical thing ever, because now you got to put those in your mind and you got to fill in the effects and the audio and the voices and everything, and it was truly magical. And I thought I would outgrow it, and I never did. I find every time I touch a comic book, it brings up a whole new exciting aspect of that bit from childhood. And I'm married to a gentleman who's crazy about comic books, anything that has to do with that sort of visual art. With us today we have Jack Enyart, he's been an important developer and writer of animation and comic books for 30 years. He's done voiceovers. So every aspect that you can possibly imagine, he has done. Voiceovers, story editing, art direction. And in recent years, and I love this word, he's been a consultant.
A consultant.
I love that.
I saw that,
He's
yes.
a consultant to major and independent studios as well as a lot of private clients. Teaches script writing and development at colleges, and is also a fine art portraitist, which is, George, I think we need our pictures done before the day's over. And he exhibits his work and sketches at exclusive events in the Los Angeles area. And we have him here in the seat with us on the Friday Matinee.
Welcome to the Friday Matinee.
Okay. How's my voice level here? I realize we're on radio, so we don't have to project really. It's
you don't
have that intimate kind of thing with the microphone.
You don't have to hit
But
the
you do
back
have to-
wall, and you sound just fine.
Okay,
And you can get right up nice and close with that
nice,
microphone.
yeah, okay.
Much better. Now you're right in our ear.
Oh, good. This is good?
Jack,
Yeah.
you came to us partly because of one of the young men who works here at the station, Andrew Menjivar.
The Menji.
The Menji. We call him
Yes.
Menji, which was a revelation to you. And so now you've got a whole new character in mind, don't you?
Yes, I do. Menji's the sidekick who solves everything.
Solves everything.
For the clueless teenagers, for
us,
Already writing.
who did the murder? And who do we unmask? And Menji's going, yeah.
And he's also that guy for us here, the old folks, who's like, Menji, what's this technical thing? I don't know how to fix this.
And quite possibly the comic relief, perhaps.
There's that.
I think so. Yeah, he's adorable. So
you've come to us through one of our own family members,
Yeah.
which is very fun for us. And you have had a long and storied career. I'm super curious, what was, for me as an outsider, and George from the outside looking in the world of cartoons and comics, what was this like for you? What was the progression? What was the moment that you said, I want to grow up and do that?
There was no moment like that because my father was a cartoonist.
Your father was?
Yes. Well, actually, this was early 50s, and he started off as a cartoonist, and then he got into advertising. He formed an advertising agency, and since Mad Men has been on the air, this has been really helpful. I'm crazy about Mad Men because I can explain my family background very easily. My father was the West Coast Don Draper.
Oh, my heavens.
He was exactly like that. And I would like to apologize right now to the entire female gender for the treatment treatment of women on that show, which is absolutely true to the time and period.
Jack, I didn't grow up in the 50s or work in the 50s. I did in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and I can tell you it didn't change a whole
It
lot
didn't
in certain
change too much,
fields.
yes, yeah.
FYI.
Yeah, and
So-
towards the end of Mad Men, as it got into the early 70s, and I worked in my dad's ad agency, and my wardrobe was starting to show up. It's like, oh my God, I had that shirt,
Oh, very fun,
So-
very fun.
But that's how I was trained.
So you grew up
basically-
with it?
Yes, and I was cheap labor. He put me to work on the drawing board, and we'd paste up ads and things. And he actually had a cartoonist on staff.
I want one of those here.
Yeah, I think everybody should have a cartoonist
I
on
definitely
staff.
have.
Yeah.
Okay, so you grew up with this.
Yeah.
You saw the world. You knew what was happening. At what
Oh,
point
mm-hmm.
did you say, okay, I don't want to leave the family farm and go to the big city? You wanted to stay in the business that you kind of saw.
Yeah, well, the family farm was basically Los Angeles and Hollywood, and it's funny. My mother, at one point, I have two brothers, and she was very distressed. She says, "I'm trying to, tell you guys how to grow up right and have a good example, in the family for a career and everything." She says, "I can't think of anybody in the family who's a good example."
So in your own household, you didn't have.
Yes, my aunt was a famous stripper.
Wow, nice.
Yes, and
There's a character for you.
Yes, and in the 50s, and then she formed an all-girl orchestra, and she had a local TV show here in the 1950s.
That sounds familiar. What's
what-
Ada Leonard and her all-girl band.
I've heard of that. Was that her stage name as well, Ada Leonard?
Yes,
I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yeah.
Google Ada
Wow,
Leonard.
from bubble dancer to band. That's
Yes,
pretty fantastic.
Yes, right.
So-
And my grandfather worked on the Hollywood Reporter, and so the family was just in the business.
So when you go to
Yeah.
reach for characters, you don't have to go far.
No, I don't. Here's the most interesting thing, if we want to jump ahead here. As I said, I have two brothers, and I worked for a long time on Alvin and the Chipmunks. I wrote I don't know, probably a third of the episodes.
The biggest crush on Alvin.
The one in the 80s, right?
Yeah, the one in the
Okay.
80s. Yeah.
Loved Alvin.
Yeah, and one day I was sitting with my co-story editor, and she looked at me. She said, "What is the birth order of the Chipmunks?"
Oh,
and I said,
good question.
Yeah, and I said immediately. I said, "Simon's the oldest."
Yeah, I would think.
Yeah, Simon's the oldest. Alvin's the middle, and Theodore's the youngest. And she said, "How do you know that?" And I said, "Oh my God." Because it's me and my brothers. And I went home and I
which
told
one are
my
you?
wife this, and I said, "Did you know I've been writing about me and my brothers?" And she goes, "Duh."
So which one are you?
Simon.
You're
See the glasses?
Simon.
I'm the sensible one.
Oh, that's
My
very
middle
good.
brother is slightly a lunatic still, and my youngest brother is really sweet and nice and all that. And that dynamic is exactly, what goes
So
on in
you
the
fit
family.
very
Probably not
nicely.
the only family, yeah.
Yeah, no, but it fit very nicely. Now, you're never supposed to have a favorite, but when you were young and your dad was doing things, not things you've worked on, but did you have a favorite growing up, a favorite cartoon character?
Oh, favorite cartoon character?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, you know what I really loved was the Jay Ward cartoons, Rocky
I
and Bullwinkle.
loved.
I mean, it was just so nuts. Oh, and I will tell you why. Again, this was the early to mid '60s, and somehow we got on Jay Ward's mailing list.
No.
And we got the most amazing things in the mail because Jay Ward was just this tremendous promoter. He ran Bullwinkle for president in 1960, and they had a block party on Sunset Boulevard, and I went to this. The Bullwinkle statue.
yes,
I think
the
they
old
unveiled
Rocky
it.
and Bullwinkle
Can you
statue.
imagine how cool this was for a 10-year-old?
Oh,
I mean, we would get
mind-blowing.
announcements. People are suing us because we did this on the show or whatever.
Wow. So you had all the inside scoop.
I had all the inside scoop. Yeah.
What a
There
great
was
place
such
to
a-
be.
Yeah.
Those Jay Ward cartoons were so satirical and so funny and so many as I was a very young person. I mean, like I said, I was born in the mid-60s, so these were already mostly reruns. They'd still show them on Saturday morning. But growing up, you like the cartoons as a young person, but then as you start to understand the humor and the elemental satire of it is still something I love watching to this day.
Well, that's something that I wanted to mention because generally, I still try to work for a general kind of audience, and the audience is, there should be humor for everybody. And
You're not
watching
thinking for a 10-year-old. You're not thinking for
You're thinking for everybody.
For everybody.
Yeah, and it's like, there was a time when the family would sit down and, and watch TV together. Also, I realized this very literally when I'd do talks at libraries and schools and things like that, and I'd stand up, and in the front row, there'd be like little 4-year-olds looking up at me like wide-eyed like that, and in the middle row, there'd be the older kids, and they're intense in drawing, and the back would be like college students with portfolios for me to look at, and you're trying to keep everybody interested. it, but a Looney Tune does that to a certain extent. The Jay Ward cartoons did. But you wouldn't get a gag like Boris Badenov, which is a takeoff of a famous, Russian opera, Boris Godunov, until you got to college, and then people are laughing because they got a joke that's 10 years old.
Exactly.
So I think that's, time bomb humor, shall we call it?
Exactly.
So those were your favorites. How did some of that influence what you started to do when you started to create things? We're definitely going to cover all the people you've worked for, but when you were creating and you were coming up with your own things, and how did that influence you, or did you have characters that you looked at and said, "Oh, I want an element of this," or did it all just percolated in the back of your head and started to fall out?
Well, as I say, when I started I started at Warner Brothers. Well, let me give you a little. I started writing comic books. Okay, and by the way, my advice for people is join organizations. I was in my 20s and I was doing artwork, and yes, absolutely, and I joined something called the Comic Art Professional Society, and that connected me with other cartoonists. And by the way, at the first meeting of that organization, two guys met who had been working on the same comic book for 25 years, and they'd never seen each other.
Really?
Yes.
Like one was doing layout and one
the
was
other
doing something else. Oh, that's hysterical.
Yeah. So.
But it's the brotherhood.
Yeah. So that got me started. So I was writing Looney Tunes comic books and Disney comic books and all that, and then I went to work for Warner Brothers Animation, and they were kind of moribund then. This was before.
And can I ask how old you were when that happened?
Sure. I was in my late 20s.
Okay.
And so this is about, 1980, something
Okay.
like that, and I was like the young only guy in the department. We were putting together specials, using some old footage and things like that. So what was your original question? We digressed, yeah.
But you went to work for Warner Brothers.
Oh, yes. So I think what I was trying to say was you were saying how I applied this to characters and such. I worked pretty much on characters that were handed to me in major studios.
Okay.
We developed some things from within. Like the Chipmunks came about because I was working for a studio called Ruby Spears Productions.
Yes.
Yeah. And Ross Bagdasarian Jr. and his wife Janice Carmen, he was the son of the originator of the Chipmunks back in the 50s, and he found all his father's old stuff. And he was a lawyer, and being a lawyer, he said, I'm sitting on top of something here. So they brought it into Ruby Spears, and basically within Ruby Spears, I and my writing partner, a couple of other people, developed the show to the Bags, we call them, the Bagdasarians specifications, So that's
it became
what the process
the
was
grown-up Mickey and Judy put on a show. You were given this wonderful, wonderful treasure trove of
Pretty much,
material,
yeah.
and then put it all together.
Yeah, and I always thought, working for the Warner Brothers cartoons, I always thought it was like working for a repertory company or like working for Warner's under contract in the 30s, and they'd come in and they'd say, we need something for Betty Davis and Humphrey Bogart. I say, okay, so you'd write it, and it was the same thing. It's like, we need something for Bugs and Daffy and make it a Western,
Oh, fun, and they don't
and
wrinkle.
I do it, yeah, and I loved that, and it was like working, for a group of actors.
How long were you there at Warner Brothers?
Let's see, that was a couple of years there, but I kept writing comic books for them under contract. My ideal situation was to be on staff at an animation studio, and then in my spare time, what a little spare time I had, to also write the comic books.
You have a lot of energy, Jack. I can't imagine that was tough for you. It's just like you leave one, hit the ground running, go someplace else, do.
You have to in the arts.
Yeah.
By the way, let me tell you something interesting about my consulting business. I run a business where I help people with their cartoon projects. And you would think, you look at self-help books in the library and all that, it's like getting your creativity going and, how to access yourself and organize. I don't find that is the problem with creative people at all. What I found, and, students, like you, Menji, and all that, they had too much. And
yes,
I had
and
to
how do you
organize
corral
it and
it?
settle it and corral it,
Yeah.
So this
And
getting
focus and stay
up out
on-
of bed in the morning isn't the problem.
No.
It's going to bed at a decent hour, and stopping work on something that may lead nowhere. He's nodding over here.
It's true. And George can tell you, we meet a lot of people that come through these doors that are there, and they do more than one thing. They're more than they're the
Hyphenates.
They're hyphenates.
We were talking about this before
They're
going on the air.
actor, director, musician, and that's exactly exactly right, is you can have all that creative energy and they'll start a book or they'll start a treatment or they'll start and then how do you winnow that down to make sure that that's the thing you concentrate on, the serving of all masters. But you found a way to do that and again, the animation field has so many beautiful elements to it, from the drawing to the storyboarding. It kind of fans out and feeds itself. So did you was there a turning point? Because I want to talk about the fact that you, in addition to all the animation and the outside help that you brought to it, you've also done some voiceover. Mm-hmm. That's being an actor. That's your hyphenate. You're a multi-hyphenate. And I'm curious, did you have that kind of experience when you were growing up, like in high school, or?
More so because of the kind of, that's a good question, because more so because of the kind of upbringing that I had. Since I went to work in my father's advertising agency, I saw a very versatile environment, so there weren't any limits. He came in, I would come into the agency and he'd sit me down and he'd say, do this or do something else, or, go get in the delivery truck and, send something. So I didn't have a sense of limitations.
No compartmentalization.
No, and I wonder how that goes in schools now, because when I was when I was growing up in school, they kept asking you, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Well, you're 13 years old. You don't know what you want to do.
They still don't know.
Yeah.
They still ask that question.
But the technological changes have made a huge difference, because now, if you want to become a film editor or whatever, go down to Best Buy and get the equipment and teach yourself, and nobody tells you can't do that.
Plus, there are so many platforms now where you can show that. Once upon a time, you had television, you had film, and that was kind of it.
Yeah.
And good luck if you were nobody. You got your friends to see it, or you mailed them off into oblivion somewhere that you would never get any response.
Same thing with singers, and there's a lot more places.
Right. Here's what it was like, say, at Ruby Spears in the 1980s. Okay, there were 3 television networks. Yes, children, you might not believe it, but way back when. 3 television networks, and they'd make these huge presentations, the traditional presentations that we were talking about, stories and artwork and everything, and they'd take them into the networks, and if those 3 networks didn't buy anything, the studio was practically out of business for a year.
Right.
So that was it.
That was it.
But now there's all these other platforms and multi-purposing, and what do they call it? The long string? Do you know about that? What that is?
The long string.
Is it the long something or other? Somebody will call in. But this was a concept I hadn't heard of, which is how long a property can be exploited.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, the long tail, I think it is. Yeah.
When we used to do contracts, originally we'd say things like cassette, video, and then we had to add a clause that said, and any technology in the future that might be.
The first time I saw that, it was like Star Trek. Star Trek, and it's like anything in the known or unknown universe.
Yeah. And
it used to be the known universe. Then I think they had to put the unknown universe just to cover I Love Lucy reruns on Jupiter.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and that's true though when you talk about the long tail, because now, a friend of mine just had produced a pilot, and it's really funny. It's kind of low budget, but still tightly edited. And she's like, now what? And if nothing else, she could put it on YouTube and monetize it,
exactly.
or Vimeo or something. Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of ways she can at least go.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating. So what we want to do probably in coming back, I know he's been silently sitting here monitoring our new video system here, but Andrew, is it? We
Andrew Menjivar.
Bring Menji in and talk about his experiences, because Jack, you are also an instructor.
Yes.
And you instructed our Menji, who does great work. And if you go to our YouTube page, it's youtube.com/KHTS radio, and see our promo video, that was one of the first pieces that I saw that Menji did for us here. And I was like blown away.
He's a talented guy.
Because that's having to watch a bunch of stuff and listen to a bunch of stuff and have to put up with a lot of things that you can get out all the...
He's got more hyphens than you know what to do with.
That's true. But we're gonna come back and talk about that, and also talk more about the fantastic world of Jack Enyart.
Sounds like a Hanna-Barbera show.
Yeah, I have to think of the guy who sang that song "Fire" in the late '60s, and he had that album.
Arthur Brown.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. It was the
crazy world of Arthur Brown. Yes,
Thank you. I think we have that song actually.
Might want to bring that in.
I don't know. Maybe we should. But we're going to have to take a break. This worked out quite well, didn't it?
Yes,
We
it
didn't
did.
have to stop. We didn't have to get halfway into something.
The new clock.
Hold that thought and then come back and figure this is actually wonderful. So this is the Friday Matinee on your
it is.
on your hometown station.